Our guest tonight, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick in the middle. He is currently the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, another great government phrase, at the Pentagon. He's been doing that since early last year, and I think a lot of people saw the announcement this week that he is going to be wrapping up his illustrious U.S. government career sometime next month. Sean, began life as a student, as many of you are here. He studied physics with degrees and advanced degrees from the University of Georgia. Go Bulldogs. He has over 2 decades of scientific and technical intelligence experience at the university level, U.S. Naval Research Lab, the National Reconnaissance Office, CIA, DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and at the Office of the Secretary of Defense. In 2012, he assumed responsibilities as the Defense Intelligence Officer for Scientific and Technical Intelligence, did that job for 4 years. In 2016, until he took this job at AARO last year, he held a variety of senior positions to include the Deputy Director of Intelligence for the U.S. Strategic Command, the NSC Director of National Security Strategy, the Deputy Director of Intelligence, and the D&I Rep to U.S. Space Command, and then finally as the Chief Scientist at the Missile and Space Intelligence Center. Shane Harris, here to my immediate right, is a journalist at the Washington Post. Many of you know Shane for the great reporting he's done on intelligence, national security, and foreign policy. Some of you may have seen his story that came out this weekend that identified a Ukrainian general as being responsible for the operation that broke up the Nord Stream pipeline. If you haven't read the article, go read it, because Sean needs as many hits on that article as you can get him. So Shane, not Sean, Shane.
We'll get mixed up in the night, don't worry about it.
Shane, Sean, David. Shane was part of the team that won the 2021 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for reporting on the January 6th attacks on the U.S. Capitol and the efforts to overturn the U.S. presidential election. He was a reporter previously at the Wall Street Journal, Daily Beast, National Journal. He's written 2 great books, The Watchers, The Rise of America's Surveillance State, and At War, The Rise of the Military Internet Complex. Both great books, and both served as the source of articles in the Washington Post as well. He co-hosts a podcast for Lawfare called Chatter. His co-host is our moderator tonight, David Priest. David is a writer and speaker on national security issues. He is an author, most famous for the book, The President's Book of Secrets, which looks at the President's Daily Brief. He's a former CIA analyst and briefer. Currently, he's serving as the Director of Intelligence at Bedrock Learning, a startup national security training technology company. He serves as senior fellow here at the Hayden Center and has been a visiting professor at the Schar School of Policy and Government. With that, I'd like to turn it over to David to begin the conversation. A reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, if you don't have a note card yet, just wave to our student volunteers. They'll get you one and they'll get you a pen, and we'll start to collect those as the event goes on. And David will remind you, and we'll take a look at those going forward. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Larry. I will suggest you don't write the questions too early, because we're going to have a few questions and answers here, and you don't want to waste your shot on a question that may get asked. So I want to put what you're doing right now, at least for a few more days, into context. So I'm going to ask Shane to give us a little bit of an overview of national security and journalism on the issue of UAPs, whatever they've been known by. But before we do that, Sean, I'd like to give you a chance to accept our congratulations on your retirement and for the work you've done in many offices so far, and to put this job into context before we get into the details of the job. How does this compare to so many of those previous assignments that Larry just told us about? And how is it the same and different from other issues of national security you've worked on?
Great, thanks. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. That's an interesting question. I've been very fortunate to have a long career doing a wide range of assignments in a wide variety of intelligence and Department of Defense and executive agencies and community. Worked with a fantastic cadre of people across all of those communities. My background spans really a lot of science and technology, acquisition, policy, intelligence community, Department of Defense, scientific community, and as a consequence, and operations, lots of operations, really my favorite part. This job and standing up this organization really brings together all of those skills because this is such a hard problem to get at. It requires science and technology and understanding of the basic phenomenologies that we're trying to explore. How do you apply the scientific method out in the world to address the unknown? Operationally, how do you design operations and push the department and the IC from a policy perspective and a guidance perspective on how do you respond and what do you do? And an intelligence perspective of, okay, which parts of these may have a foreign nexus? How do we address that? How do I bring in the intelligence community to go and look at all of those things? And then how do you build that team across all of those different interagency partners? We have a tremendous team in the office. We've got partnerships with NASA and with FAA and across the IC, the DoD, the DOE. It's really a great opportunity to bring all those players together to bring the entire power of the United States government and all of its partners into this problem set. And how do you address really the unknown? This is really looking at the unknown out in the world and trying to make sense of it. And that's really the exciting part of that particular assignment. Now, the other thing I'll say is, I think I've probably said this a couple of times in the past, but this is now my sixth organization standing up from scratch. So I'm either making somebody very angry and they keep making me do it over again, or we know what we're doing. When you start doing something like that, right? So I've laid out a goal and a vision and a direction on how we were going to do it, and we measured how we were going to get there, and we've institutionalized a lot of that, and we can talk about that throughout the evening.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So Shane, set the stage for us. What Sean's describing here is a new office that we'll break down in a few minutes, but it builds on, 7 decades of interest from the national security community in now called UAPs, but unexplained phenomenon, and of course interest from the press in those very acts and observations and in the way the government looks at them. Can you characterize that, but especially with a focus on what I'll call the modern period, the last 6 years or so since 2017, and what happened there that changed things a bit?
Yeah, and I'll note too before I start, we almost wore the same alien socks tonight.
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to be wearing alien socks, or I would have broke some out.
I have that pair.
Sean, if you're wearing anything else with aliens on it, we don't want to see it. Just keep it undercover. Thank you.
We co-host a podcast and we have the same footwear choices apparently. Yes, and I think it is right to sort of divide these into periods of maybe sort of the modern interest, which I'll talk about in a second, to this 7 decades long fascination in the subject. It is not a new phenomena that the national security community is interested in unidentified flying objects, right? I mean, we don't have the time to go into all of the substantial history of going back to things like Blue Book and Grudge and other operations in the Cold War period. I will recommend a new book on the subject, by the way, by the terrific historian Garrett Graff, who's also a dear friend of mine, the book appropriately titled UFO. It's about this thick and is basically an exhaustive history of that very subject, of the official record and the history of examination of these phenomena. But suffice to say, there's been tremendous interest in this, and largely from the public, right? Journalists have been covering sightings by people of what we used to call flying saucers, and then it became UFOs and then UAPs, terminology that changed each time to try and destigmatize, interestingly, the notion of what these objects that were real, that people were seeing were. And I think we all kind of understand that it was largely the domain of anecdote and kind of maybe urban legend, and yes, there was some serious inquiry on this by the government, but they were not really transparent about that. That was sort of the point. And all of that really, I think, changes quite significantly in 2017, which is sort of where as I will confess, a lifelong kind of UFO nut and true believer, it's certainly in extraterrestrials and intelligent life in the universe, not necessarily that they've come here. I remain open-minded on the question. But I was a national security reporter at the Wall Street Journal in 2017 when the New York Times broke. You'll all remember this explosive front-page story written by Hilling Cooper and Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, that the Pentagon had this classified effort or activity that was examining UFOs. And they had some pretty fantastic images and film that was taken from the cockpit of some Navy aircraft. Of pretty spectacular UFOs. I was floored by this story, not because I thought that it was evidence that the government had suddenly discovered aliens existed, but that there was a serious, dedicated effort within the Pentagon to figure out what in the heck are these things that are flying around, and that naval aviators in these instances were obviously seeing. They weren't imagining that there was something there. I thought that was one of the most important stories of the year in 2017. I may have been in the minority in my newsroom, but I thought it was just tremendous. And that really began a kind of new period where we're in now, where national security reporters like myself are reporting on this subject with a level of seriousness and purpose and focus because the agencies and departments that we cover are paying attention to it with a level of seriousness and focus and purpose. And for me as a reporter, that's terrific because I get to write about a subject that's fascinating to me anyway. But I kind of see this as a period where the government has been far more transparent than it ever was about what those efforts are. It's been much more systematic about it. It's not completely open on the subject in all ways. The intelligence community rarely is. But there's a whole new kind of coverage that's developed around this that's not about the question of whether or not aliens exist. It's a question of what are these things and are they a threat to national security? And that has opened up a much more sober and I think productive line of reporting and inquiry and discussion, certainly in the journalistic community, but I hope in the public at large, about a subject that clearly we all find very fascinating.
And part of that public effort is the AARO itself, just the existence of it and the fact that you're here talking to us, Sean. But let's break down that acronym that Larry, gamely got through, the All-Domain Anomalies Resolution Office. All of those perfectly good words in English separately, but when put together, it's kind of a mouthful. So, office, first of all, it is a group of people. It's not just you.
Yeah.
Can you characterize the types of people that form this unit, without naming anyone in particular, but describing the kinds of backgrounds that make up this thing that is an office?
Right. So AARO consists of scientists and engineers, operators, intelligence officers, pilots. I've got computer scientists. I've got data engineers. I mean, we bring together a lot of disparate skills focused on how we operate. Now, I've set up the office to be almost a microcosm of a combatant command. For those of you familiar with those structures, so there is an S&T group, and there is an analytic group, and there's an operations group, and there's an information sharing and data integration group. And essentially, those are the four groups, and I have skill sets that fit all of those. I also have partners and liaisons, from NASA and FAA and others that help integrate across the community to bring that together.
Okay, that's the office part.
That's the office part.
Let's go to the other end. All domain. Does that refer more to source material, or does that
No.
refer to the phenomenon you're looking at?
Right, so if you'll recall, the legislation in 23, NDA 23, gave us all domains. They said you are now responsible for not just aerial phenomena, but anything in space or undersea, or anything that might be viewed as moving between those two.
Okay. All right. Anomalous.
So anomalous, if you look in the NDAA language, we actually had those definitions put in the back of the language so that people could see what they were. Anomalous is anything that a sensor or a person, when it sees it or detects it, doesn't initially understand what it is. Doesn't mean it's not understandable. It just means that initially they don't know what that looks like, what it is, what it's doing.
It's a pretty wide purview,
Yeah.
right? Because that's everything from a pilot seeing an odd refraction, an optical artifact, right? Something having to do with the nature of light and wavelength, to someone seeing what definitively seems to them, or a sensor, is a physical object. It's all of that, right?
It's all of that.
Okay. Now the hard part, the R, resolution. You're charged with actually reaching resolution on these unexplained phenomenon. Now, all of intelligence does this. The purpose of intelligence, a wise man once told me, was to narrow the range of uncertainty when there is inherently uncertainty. This is full of uncertainty. The issues coming to you aren't like many other Intel topics, but they are similar in that you're trying to narrow that cone of uncertainty, but resolving is really, really hard when they are, by definition, things that weren't resolvable before they came to your office.
That's right.
How does that R part work?
So that's where our analytic framework comes into play. That was one of the first things we did when we stood this up, right? Is I laid out an analytic framework that heretofore had not existed. These reports or anecdotes would come in, people would look at them, they'd go, we don't know what this is, and they do maybe a little bit of math, a little bit of back, but they did no analysis. They did no real serious look at how do I get to what the basic of that, or the basis of that thing is. So we stood up a framework that's an Intel way of doing it. It's a red team, blue team. So I have an S&T team and I have an Intel analytic team, and those two teams get the package of any case that comes in, and they analyze the data through the lenses of their own tradecraft or methodology. So these scientists and engineers will look at it and break it down from hey, how does this sensor work? What is it detecting? And based off of that, what are the parameters that thing that it's detecting could or could not be doing? To the Intel community, who's going to look at it through the lens of the intelligence record. Do I have anything in the intelligence record that says somebody is doing something that matches those signatures? It's the signatures that you're looking for. Those two groups then come together. They play essentially red team, blue team off of each other. If they disagree, they go into what we affectionately call a cage match. And they have to then prove to each other and then back to the next technical peer of review what do they think it is? What is the narrowed range of uncertainty to what that is? Now, most of these, are very easily determined to be prosaic things that we can identify. And that is a training problem that we're working through.
Can you give us some examples of that? What is something that you put in that prosaic category that still comes to your office because someone's not familiar with what they're observing or what the sensor is reporting, but you can resolve it?
So the most simplest thing is a balloon, believe it or not, right? And because why? Why is that a thing? We have a number of pilots who will see these off in the distance, and there is an optical illusion that they will often see. It's called parallax. We will actually be putting out a educational piece on it so that people understand what it is. But they see it, they don't understand it, they report it, and they write down in their report, this is a UAP. And in the description and in the fields of what they have to report to us, they will clearly say, however, it looks like a balloon, it's got a tether on it, it looks like it's flying with the wind. But because they mark it as a UAP, it comes to us.
Okay.
Right, and so now that's a training issue. That's don't mark it as a UAP if you know it's a balloon. That's a hazard, that's a flight safety issue, that's something else. Others are sensors. Sensors and balloons have the same problem. So most of these sensors that we get data off of are military platforms. Military platforms are not designed as scientific instruments or intelligence collectors. They're designed to do one thing: identify what that thing is over the horizon and put a weapon on it. And if they can't do that, it comes up as an anomaly. I don't know what that is. In other words, the plane, the platform, the algorithms that have been trained to identify what missile or what aircraft is on the other side of the horizon, if they don't know what that is, it comes up as anomalous. All right, that gets reported. So now you've got to figure out, how do I train those sensors to understand what a balloon or a quadcopter or whatever other normal object is, what does it look like in that sensor. So my S&T group has been spending the last 18 months laying out a calibration campaign for every one of those sensors against all of those known objects. What does a balloon look like when I fly a jet at it at half a Mach, Mach 1, 1.5 Mach in all of those sensors? So that we can try to reduce false alarms, because that's basically what those are, right? False alarms.
Right.
To get to more of the, what are things that are measurable that may actually be truly an unknown thing.
Right.
So I think I've said this at the NASA panel briefing before. At that time, I think we were looking at around 800 cases, and I said maybe out of all of those, there's only about 2 to 4%, I think was around the number that we have enough data for that are truly something we want to go dig in and go figure out what that is. And most everything else we can readily identify.
And you think that percentage holds true now since you made those remarks?
Yep. In fact, I just checked recently.
Okay. Shane, what Sean has just described is not actually that different from what journalists do, which is there's something out there that's reported to you, and it's inherently interesting for some reason, and you use all your tools to go at it and check it out. But there is one difference, which is in this case, there are all kinds of advanced tools and technologies that are involved. You've studied those tools and technologies as a journalist on these topics. Is it getting harder to identify because of the evolution of the technology? For example, some of the drone technology that is known that is out there now is more advanced than many people could have imagined even 20 years ago. Does that make this a harder national security problem in your mind than many others?
Well, I suspect it certainly is for reporting on it, because there's just so much more stuff that's out there, and the technology is quite more advanced, and the sightings are increasing. I suspect it also makes it more difficult for people in Sean's position too. I mean, we've seen videos that have circulated over the years that appeared that initially were categorized as UAPs that have subsequently been classified or attributed to drones built by China. So there is an answer to some of these things that are out there. It can take some time. I think another challenge for this is that in the age that we're in which everyone has a video camera in their pocket, there's just a lot of inputs that are out there, and that kind of makes it more to sift through. Whereas I think prior to that era, when journalists wrote about witness sightings, I mean, they could just sort of they were, I think, probably rarer. So there's an element of that too. I think what's become challenging for us, though, for reporting on a lot of this, is you can kind of divide this into roughly two categories. One is there is reporting on what people like Sean are doing, right? Reporting on reports, reporting on studies, reporting on activities, reporting on congressional testimony, things that have that official activity behind them. And that's a fairly straightforward proposition for someone in my line of work. You write about a report, you interview people, you cover a hearing, et cetera. The harder thing has been when we have gone out to try and talk to people who claim to have information about these activities, right? How do we verify the stories of whistleblowers who've come forward with information that they believe the government has about these craft and what they are? That's a really, really big challenge as a reporter. I cover the intelligence space, so I'm already dealing with things that are quite secretive and often behind the veil. You add to that the kinds of subjects we're talking about now are anomalous. It's one thing to write a story about who blew up a pipeline under the Baltic Sea. We know the pipeline blew up. We know people know how to blow up pipelines. We have facts and things that we can root that in an experience. Writing about UAPs is very different. And because there are more abundant technological explanations for what these things might be, that only kind of makes my job more difficult. But my job is also not to attribute these things, right? My job is to go out and report what I can and bring people the facts that I can bring them. And sometimes we can't get the story to the point where we feel that it's publishable. But you can spend a lot of time as a reporter now just reporting on the official activity, which is really quite remarkable. And that's why I think that what's happened since 2017 has been such a sea change. And you can spend a lot of time as a reporter, by the way, writing about technological advances out there that people are seeing evidence of flying around in the sky.
Sean, let me pick up on something that Shane brought up. you're looking at information from all kinds of sources. It's pilot reports, presumably. It's civilian reports. It's sensor readings. But there are also people who claim they've seen and heard things even within the government, the so-called whistleblowers and actual whistleblowers. How do you seek to get the information that they purport to know or have heard and bring that into the system in a way that still protects them when they're feeling that they haven't been heard before?
Right, that's a good question. So Arrow has really two main missions, the way I break it up and describe it to people. We have the here and now forward operational mission, which is a lot of what we spend most of our time and effort on, what we've discussed thus far. We have the historical mission. So legislatively, I'm required to do exactly what Shane's speaking of, which is I need to bring in all of the people that have that claim of what they have information to share about programs they believe to be, relative to reverse engineering programs and whatnot. They are brought in under whistleblower protection status. We have full authorities across all of the DOD, IC, DOE, NASA to hear anything they have to say. We do that in a protected space. We document it, and then we ask them questions to try to get to things that I can go, like Shane has said, investigate. What can I go pull on? What can I go research? How can I go get evidence that helps support their case or their statements? That's a lot. That's very time consuming. I have a whole team that does nothing but that.
But it also requires that person to actually cooperate. That is
That's
not
right.
to just talk publicly,
That's right.
but to be willing to sit and answer questions and provide evidence that they may have. And there may be a case that you're thinking of here that has been public recently.
Arrow absolutely wants to hear from all of them. And I want to make something very clear. When people come in, just because somebody has something that they say, and they say that they've seen this, they've heard this, they've been told this, that's the starting point. That's not the ending point, right? No matter how many times somebody wants to say that X is true, unless I have something to research and we can go validate, and we have access to all of the National Archives, all of the agency archives, all of the service archives, every program we need access to, and we go and dig into those, all right? And I've had people come, I've had a lot of very good individuals come in and interview and put their statements on the record and have helped us, pick out, here are some things to go research, and we go and do. And we go and get evidence one way or the other. And then we have to pull that together into a historical record report, which is due in June of next year. But given the appetite for all of this, we're not going to wait till June of next year, and I've decided to break it up into 2 volumes. So volume 1, I will sign out before I retire next month.
We were hoping it would be out today and we could talk about it.
Yeah,
You
well,
failed us.
the coordination process is long.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
But I will do that before I retire.
Okay. Shane, you may want to follow up on this because the press, one thing the press does habitually is when they hear whistleblower about somebody who has information and claims that they are not being heard by certain authorities, typically the press is all over that and wants to investigate it independently if possible, but at least draw attention to it to see what story it reveals about the wider enterprise. So what do you hear when you hear Sean talk about the way that whistleblowers are encouraged to come in, but it does require cooperation from them to start the investigation?
Yeah, I mean, it's not dissimilar from the challenge I face with sources, right? I need the source to cooperate. And in some cases, it's about trying to persuade someone to talk to me. Other cases, it's people who are seeking me out because they want to talk to me because they know what I've covered. In the past 6 or 7 months, I've probably interviewed about half a dozen people who claim to have knowledge of a reverse engineering program of crashed material or artifacts or craft, however you want to call it. That is something I actively talk to people about. We have not published anything about that yet, but I am looking into it. I spend a lot of my time looking into things. I probably publish in general about information about 10% of what I talk to people about, because the space that I'm dealing in is one in which people are frequently talking about things that they've heard, things that they've seen, things they believe. That's not exclusive to the UAP phenomenon, by the way. And we just have very high standards of what we publish and what we don't. It may be different in the case of what Arrow's doing, in the sense that if you're trying to collect a record, and what does this tell you, both about the history of these sightings, but also, Sean has a capability I don't have, which is if somebody gives him, an alleged code name to an activity, he can go look into that. I can try to look into that and get people to tell me what it is, and I've heard some code names, probably some of the same ones you've heard. But we're fundamentally in a different position as journalists. I don't have a security clearance. I don't have subpoena authority. It would be nice.
I don't know if that'd be nice.
Yeah, well, I'll pass on the security clearance, because then I couldn't talk about anything I learned. But I think we all are very eager to hear what Arrow has to say and what the report is going to be, and no doubt that is frustrating, probably for Sean in some sense, because there will be people who probably are not satisfied with what the report says, just in the same way that there are often people who are not satisfied with what I report or don't report. But it's just important to remember that we're in the business of gathering and verifying information, and there has to be a rigor to that process. Otherwise, the process isn't credible. And I think that's what we're certainly trying to do in journalism at the Washington Post.
So it sounds frustrating that you have some sources referring to things that aren't on the record yet, right? And there may be something there, there may not, but you have limited avenues to investigate that yourself. It would be nice, for example, to have the director of Arrow who would be sitting here that you could ask about one of these issues. Hey, he's sitting right here. Is there anything you want to ask that you think actually might preview the report and might come out now that would help you to at least shut down some of these things you're hearing that you can say, no, that's probably not worth pursuing?
Boy, how much are you giving me over the rest of the interview?
I'm giving you one question.
Oh man, one question out of all of this.
Yeah.
Look, I think that it's. I can go back and ask. We could pick the crash retrieval program. We could pick the videos. But I continue to be fascinated by unresolved, unattributed objects, right? That you've talked about some of them, and they're mentioned in reports that you've issued. The orbs, right? There are images of the orbs in corners of pages in reports, so that some people take that as a knowing tell on your part. I would be curious to know, in the category of things that you have looked at that you simply cannot attribute it, you just don't know what it is. What do you do with that, and do you have thoughts about what it might be that you want to share? And how do you get your head around that analytically?
That's a great question. So let me tease that out a little bit. So we did put out on the website a video of one of those orbs, right? That we don't know what it is. Right now, we did that for a couple of reasons. One, I'm never going to get any more data for that event, right? There is nothing else I can do.
Until you invent a time machine.
Until I invent the time machine to go back, and I will have no more data for that video. That is all the data we have. As a consequence, I will never be able to say with any certainty that I can resolve that. So that is an unresolved case. We put that out there. Now, since that time, and we did that, number two, so that the public can see, hey, this is an unresolved case. I don't think it's doing anything really, really anomalous. It's just we don't know what it is.
Right.
And people have gone off to analyze it. I know a number of people have come to the conclusion that it's likely a balloon. And that's great. But from where I'm sitting, I don't have any data to back that up other than what people have already done, right? So there's a certainty level, there's a threshold of certainty that an analysis that I have to meet. I told everybody, I think 18 months ago, right? I am open to whatever, whatever the hypotheses are, but I will follow the data and the evidence wherever it goes. If it does not go anywhere, or it doesn't go anywhere that people will like it to go, then I can't do anything about that. I still have to report it. That's what it is. If you're asking me, is there something that is really, truly anomalous that we don't know what it is yet and I don't know what to do with it yet? No. I have things that are truly anomalous that we are analyzing down to the bit level of the data and the sensors that we have. And we're using it as an example for the community on how do you tackle an unknown thing, and how do I bring my two disparate communities together, my intelligence community, who has a certain tradecraft and certain standards that they have to apply to make a call, as you both know, on what a thing may or may not be. And then I have a scientific community who has a scientific methodology that has a different but yet still high standard of how do they address a problem. And how do I get those two communities to learn from each other the techniques that could be used and applied to these things? And then from there, what are what are the possible hypotheses for what these things could be, or thing could be? And then from there, we will make a call on what is it, with what uncertainty we may or may not have. I will then have that peer reviewed. We will get it declassified, and I will put it out.
Does the so-called flying tic-tac fall into that category?
Nope, because the flying tic-tac is 2004. Right? Do you know how much data I have for that?
Probably not very much.
I have what you have.
What's on YouTube?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So-
the witness statements from the 4 pilots.
And the witness statements. And once again, our pilots are are the best pilots on the face of the planet,
Right.
right? When they say I saw X, we believe they saw X. What they think they saw and what the sensor saw and what is reality, we then have to kind of work through. And we work it through with the pilots. Like, I had a working group on one object with 3 pilots. I think we worked on that for it must have been a couple of months, and it turned out to be, it was just another aircraft. Right? And so, trying to get at that takes time.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time, because you got to sit down with the pilots, you got to sit down with the sensor operators and designers, right, to understand what the sensors are doing, and then you got to figure out how do you reconcile what the math says, what everybody is seeing, and then what are the possible explanations.
Let me walk a little bit more through that process while all of you write any questions you haven't written already and pass them to the end of the row, because we'll turn to those questions soon. I would imagine the analytic process you've described and the scientific process both have a bias towards using the simplest explanation possible first. So let's take a generic, and I know no 2 reports are the same, but a generic report. If you can attribute that to some kind of optical artifact, some kind of optical illusion even, that's the easiest explanation, right? Because especially if the sensor hasn't picked up something that is definitive as an object, it could be an observational fluke. But let's say you've ruled that out. You've done all the tests, you've done the recreations, you've looked at the imagery through the exact windows and distances that are supposedly involved. There's something there that is unexplained by that. Then you move to balloons, other aircraft in the area, things that could, from a distance without relational perspective, the parallax issue you mentioned, things that the normal human being and even a trained pilot would look at and say, that did not behave like anything I've ever seen, but you can rebuild how it could be that way based on what we know.
Right.
But let's rule that out.
Okay.
Let's say that doesn't work either. Let's say that it's something that doesn't make sense. It appears to be a propulsion device that doesn't leave sensor readings that you would expect, that moves in a way that we can't explain with current technology of our own and with our best analysis of our adversaries, be they Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, or even Canada, that we can't explain that from what we know about foreign programs. At some point, you start to get people saying, well, maybe it's extraterrestrial technology, because that seems like the simplest explanation from a certain mindset. Where do you draw the line there when something has not been explained by each of those steps that seem like the simplest explanation at each step? What evidence do you need where you can say, yeah, it is at least possible, which I think we all agree it's there already, But it's moving to just as likely as other explanations that it is something that cannot be identified from any known human source.
So you've almost got it all right, right? You've got.
That's better than I usually do.
It's pretty good.
That's great.
It's pretty good. It's not bad. If you were in my class, I might pass you. No, you've got a range of hypotheses for any given event, right? You've got the extraterrestrial hypotheses on one end, you've got the foreign intel, ISR platforms on the other end, or advanced breakthrough technologies, if you will, and in the middle you've got all the known stuff. Occam's razor still applies, no matter how much you don't want it to, it does, right? But before you get to that, each of those things, each of those hypotheses have signatures associated with them. Right? If it's a foreign breakthrough technology, there are signatures associated with what that is based on what we know in our intelligence record. In the middle, if we've got the known objects, that's where our calibration campaign comes into play because we measure those signals. This is what a drone looks like. This is what a balloon looks like, right? And now I have something to compare to. On the far extreme, when you've got the extraterrestrial one, that's where the scientific and academic community come into play, right? What we've been trying to get them to do is write peer-reviewed papers on what would that look like. So a lot of people like to say, hey, there's things that we see that defy the laws of physics. Well, that's not true. It may defy the laws of physics that you understand, but I can guarantee you that the physics community has theories for about pretty much everything, except for the unified theory of everything, which is not there yet. It may be an engineering feat that you don't, haven't seen before, but that then spans both the, foreign intel and commercial breakthroughs and other things. So trying to understand what that looks like requires, again, to raise the level of standards here, to raise the conversation. The academic and scientific community needs to take a look at kind of inverting their work on life in the universe, right? So you have an entire scientific community, NASA, ESA, dedicating time, effort, resources, and a large amount of it, looking for life in the universe, out in the universe. That's a very rigorous, scientific, validated process. They write papers on it, it goes to peer review, people can look at it and go, this is our current best scientific theory on that. It matches that signal, it's probably that, right? That's how science works.
Right.
And we know how to do, space travel. We know how to do a range of theoretical interstellar space travel, right? But it's theoretical because we haven't built it yet. So just because we haven't engineered it doesn't mean that we don't know what the basic physics might be. And there are different signatures that come off of all of those. Well, they need to write that down and flip it around and go, okay, how hard has it been for us to find other planets that have a habitable zone or in the habitable zone, right? It's been decades of work. All right, so turn that whole argument around and start writing some papers, academic community. That's what we've been trying to get you all to do. That's why my NASA partners have been so important on this of, if there's an extraterrestrial civilization, how did they find Earth? How did they get here? How are they refueling and moving around? And what are the top 3 most probable ways all of that happens? And what are the signatures associated with that? Document that in a peer-reviewed paper or papers, peer-reviewed, not just put on somebody's website. And then that gives you a grounding for that hypothesis. So now if I have data that matches that signature, I can say that. But most of my data, in fact, all of my data, matches either the middle or the left. And I can tell you for certainty that we have absolutely no evidence that anything matches the extraterrestrial hypothesis. We have no evidence of any of that. all of the evidence we have and all of the observations we have, including ones where people say, I don't understand it, it looks like it's violating the laws of physics, I can guarantee you that's not. There are advanced state-of-the-art technologies out there today that can maneuver, and flight controls that don't have control surfaces, that don't leave a trail, and they are being commercialized. My favorite one, and we're going to put a lot of this out on the website too. I mean, we're putting a lot of the research into some of these state-of-the-art technologies out there so that people can see, hey, there's some other things that could explain some of this. I'm not saying it does explain it. I'm saying this is other explanations. And one of my favorite ones is recently we did a commercial drone survey and did some research on what's going on out there. And do you know what the next biggest wave of drone technology is? Spherical drones. Do you know why? Because they're safe to use inside, so if they crash into people, you don't get hit in the head with a propeller.
It has that practical effect, yes.
It does, yes. So if you go home tonight, you go get on Google and search spherical drones, and you're going to find all kinds of spherical drones, everywhere from the R&D up through commercialization. They're trying to market them for stadiums and cameras on them, and spherical drones. That's a great thing.
You know, this should reassure me, right? This should make
No, it won't.
me feel better.
I know, it
Right,
won't.
that there is a method, and you have a plan even to get to some of those potential extraterrestrial explanations. I'm actually more concerned now because I think it would be easier if we were able to say with even low confidence, yep, probably aliens, because we can't really do much about it. Whereas if it's advanced technology and we're just discovering what it's capable of doing, and even some of our best pilots are seeing things that look anomalous to them, that's a national security threat. That means we need to be on top of this in a different way based on the findings you're putting out there.
Thank you. Yes, it is. You've made my point. So that's the whole purpose here, is to understand where we are in that spectrum of hypotheses, right? What is in our space, right? And what are we doing about it? And trying to understand those gaps and seams is a big challenge. It's a big issue.
Were you hoping when you took this job that you would be able to say in a year, which is how long you thought you'd have it originally, but it's been longer, were you hoping that you would find some evidence of something that was beyond where we were on this planet?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I told the Joint Staff, and I've told a bunch of folks on the Hill, and I've told some folks in leadership, right? The best thing that could have happened in this job is to find the aliens. Because the alternative is exactly what you just said.
Right.
Right. It is not a good thing.
Yeah.
I had really wanted to dig in and find truly unknown anomalous things we can dig into and go chase.
Yeah.
We've got a big national security problem, and we've got a big flight hazard, operational hazard problem, safety problem. Right.
Absolutely. Well, let's turn to some audience questions here. And some of these are quite challenging, but since you're on your way out, I have a feeling that you won't mind getting fired early. One question. When Arrow was first stood up, you were quoted as saying, "I have all the access I need." Can you speak to the status of the office, whether it's intelligence title, Title 50? Where do you get your authority to do the investigation that you're doing?
So the authority comes from legislation, which is law. It also comes from DOD, IC, DOE, DHS, NASA, right, and all the associated archives and whatnot. We have set up a security construct that they have all agreed to in order to how we handle the ingestion of material and information as people want to come in. We have a process, a very, very rigorous process that let's say Shane wants to come in and confess his sins and tell me all about the code words that he knows. I remember that. I'll remember that later.
It'll be on the record, right?
Yeah, right. he can come into our facility. We have an accredited facility to handle all of that. He may not even know who owns those code words, right? So he can come in, tell us, we document all that. And then all of those, all those title organizations that I just named, right? We will pick out of his statement, hey, he said Flying Wombat was a program for reverse engineering.
Do we have flying wombats?
No, well, we don't. But it's one of my favorite names that if I
do
ever
like
got
that.
to name a SAP program, it would be that one.
Right. Well, you can have kids.
I have one. She won't do it. So we take Flying Wombat and his description of it, and we separate it from him because we have to protect him, right? And then we give that to OD&I, Capco, OSD Sapco, DOE, IN, DHS, Sapco, all of them, and go, is this your program? If it is, I need the records on that program. And they go through and they'll find it.
And you're authorized to get those
And
records.
we're authorized to get those records by law, and then they'll provide that to us. And we've done that many, many times.
Right.
And then we will assess that program. Is this program really what he thinks that program is? Now, for those of you familiar with how the security constructs of some of our special access programs work, very few people actually see that file. And he, as an engineer or an operator, may only be working a piece of that pie, and so he may have interpreted this as something that it's not.
Yeah.
Or he may have seen something that he shouldn't have seen. That's an unauthorized disclosure.
Sure.
Do you come back and tell me what I didn't know, or is it?
No, I'm not going to come back and tell you what you didn't know because you're not cleared to it, right? Now, when he comes in, this is an important piece. When he comes in, right, so he was a previous federal employee working on Flying Wombat. He signed an NDA for that. He's still allowed to come in and disclose to us, but he is not exempt from his NDA when he walks out the door, and he still has to protect that information.
Let me ask you.
So don't go talking about Flying Wombat.
Well, not the
That's why I don't have a security clearance.
All the other code words are fine, but Flying Wombat just
Flying
stay away
Wombat's
from.
off.
That's the bad one. Okay.
So this is a follow-up on the whistleblower question, specifically David Grosh and what he's alleged. You've said that he has not necessarily cooperated, right? He hasn't come back in and given additional information to you. The question is there no way for you, with the authorities you just described, to verify or refute the claims that have come out publicly through other avenues?
So we don't have any information from him, so I can't comment on anything he's told other people. The only way we can get anything that he has shared to other people is if he gives permission to them to share it, because he's protected under those same laws. But I have a whole range. I've got almost 40 other people that have come in and provided a lot of rich information that we've been investigating and cross-referencing and researching and trying to figure out the truth of it. And again, that's what I'm saying. A lot of that is what's going to go into Volume 1.
Here's a question that reflects something I was thinking about in terms of a potential analytic bias looking at these topics, which is the intelligence community, it is well known, has entire teams looking at things like Russian military technology, Chinese military technology. I can't speak to Canadian military technology, but at least Russia, China, and
I know all about Canadian.
many other countries. So, of course, there are intelligence assessments out there about certain advanced systems that these countries have, which then can guide you when you have a report to say, does it match up with that? Or could it be a logical extension of this technology that has been assessed, even if it's in a very compartmented way? However, are there any intelligence assessments across the intelligence community or the wider national security community that talk about possible sources for UAP being extraterrestrial? Is there any intelligence unit outside of this office that is looking at potential extraterrestrial technology and civilization instead of looking at Russian missile systems or Chinese underwater systems?
No.
That doesn't help you then close that gap, does it?
Well, that's why I need the academic and scientific community, because that's going to be in their purview, not the intelligence community's purview. The intelligence community is designed to protect national security from other countries.
Known threats, which may vary in their vector.
That's right.
But you're not protecting against countries that don't exist on the earth, so it's hard to protect against civilizations that we don't know if they exist.
That's right.
Okay. Yep. Please, go ahead.
So I've been monitoring the live chat on YouTube. Just want to honor some of those folks. Believe me, it's been a robust dialogue out there. There have been a lot of questions. We're not going to get to all the questions either on YouTube or probably in the stack that David has. But along the lines of what you just discussed, a persistent question has to do with a senior technical advisory group that you must have stood up that is helping advise the work you do. So they're just questions about that group. What is it made up of? Are these people from outside government? Is this that academic and scientific community you just referenced?
So it's a strategic technical advisory group. They don't like to be called senior. And they actually do work. They're the review board for, the analytic framework consists of multiple layers of review, and they're one of the layers of review. We don't give out names and identities of anybody associated with this office other than me and a handful of very specific people, because of the fact that the harassment and the threats that are attendant to our ability to do this job, and I know we had the same problem with the NASA panel. I'm not going to subject my team to that. I have some of the best professionals on the face of the planet working some of this. But I'm not going to subject them or their families to that kind of harassment that is making our job a lot harder. I've had people try to dig up information on my wife, my child, where I live, make threats, send harassments. That's not called for.
And what is the claim? Is the claim that you're evil because you haven't said what they want you to say about the sources of these anomalous sightings?
That's a great way of saying it, but I would put it a different way, right? I told everybody when we stood up, I would follow the data wherever it led. Mm-hmm. That means you have to follow the data and the evidence where it leads. If you don't like where it leads, don't call me a liar and then come after me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is evidentiary scientific methodology and intelligence tradecraft. This is how the world works.
Yeah.
And we will present all of that in those reports.
Let me follow up on a related note. This is a question I put in the damned if you do, damned if you don't category. So I'll read it exactly as it's written. Why have you begun discussing the extraterrestrial possibility only near the end of your tenure with this office? And how does that comport with your mission to reduce stigma in reporting?
So that's not actually accurate. I mentioned the extraterrestrial hypothesis way at the beginning. I told everybody we would be open to any of those hypothetical ranges and possibilities, and that I would follow the data where it went, just like I just laid out. You've got those hypotheses, you've got signatures associated with it, collect the data and see what hypothesis is supported. Mm-hmm. In fact, I will repeat what I said in testimony. That is how science works, not on social media.
You know, there are some scientists on social media who actually back you on this point, but they tend to get drowned out in the noise.
I know.
Right? Sometimes in managing analysts, there is the process and there is evidence, and you weigh arguments and logic, and you present an assessment based on what's known, what isn't known, and what's assessed. But over time, good analysts do develop hunches, things that they can't point to a piece of evidence, but they say, you know, I've just got this feeling that this is where this is going. You've been working this topic pretty intensely and working with people who in turn are following aspects of it very intensely. What is your personal theory on the potential origin of extraterrestrial technology? Do you think it could be out there and could have come to Earth? Whether or not some of these individual cases are linked to it, is your personal hunch, having looked at this, that yeah, someday this office in the future could actually be able to identify something as extraterrestrial?
That almost sounds like different questions. Mm-hmm. If you're asking me is there a technological way that the office can differentiate extraterrestrial technology from Russian technology? Then sure, if you have those signatures identified between Russian technology and what the scientific and academic community might hypothesize the extraterrestrial technology will look like. Until you have that, you don't have a differentiating
Right.
measurement.
Yeah,
You
it's not
can't-
diagnostic.
It's not diagnostic enough, right?
Yeah.
If you're asking me my personal belief, it's not about what I believe, it's about what I can prove. Now, I know out in the universe, because of the vastness of the universe, it is, and I think most of the scientific community would agree with this, it is statistically impossible that there's not life out there. Whether or not that's intelligent life as opposed to intelligence community life.
There's no life in the intelligence community, we know
There's
that.
not. I mean, I've seen them on weekends. It's not pretty yet. And whether or not that life has found Earth, whether or not they've traveled here, that is a diminishing probability as you go down that chain. Like I said, that would have been the best thing that we could have happened, because the alternative is not very good.
Let me paraphrase a few questions here. You talked about interviewing American pilots, crediting them as the best in the world and honoring their observations. You didn't talk a lot about foreign observations, and yet there have been other countries out there, famously some French generals and admirals put out a report years ago saying that based on the reporting they've seen in their country, they said the likeliest explanation is probably extraterrestrial because we can't explain some of the things we've seen. Does your office have the opportunity to talk to people who aren't Americans about their observations, which in turn might help you resolve more easily some of the things simply because there's more data to triangulate?
Yeah, so we reach out across all of our allies and partners and exchange, here's what we're doing, here's our information, here's how we're approaching this problem. Most of this discussion to date, remember the office is only 18 months old now. Most of the, well, not even 18 months old, it's a little less. But most of that conversation has been, hey, United States, how are you standardizing reporting? So we give them, here's how we standardize reporting. Here's all the general admin guidance. Here's what the requirements are. And they then want to try to take that and mimic it in their country. And then as they get reporting, we'll collaborate. But all of that are preliminary discussions that we're just starting. People are just starting to get stood up and looking at it.
That takes time.
It takes time to build, but the short answer to your question is sure. We can ask any of our liaison countries, to have those conversations. But we got to standardize the reporting part first so that we have something to discuss.
Right.
Because until then, it's still anecdotal, 20-year-old reports that you're not going to get any data from.
Absolutely. We have another question from the live stream audience.
Thank you. So a terminology-related question has popped up in a number of ways, but it all boils down to, is there a distinction when you refer to extraterrestrial versus non-human intelligence?
Well, if I remember correctly, non-human intelligence was originally coined in the 1950s on one of the historical documents that turned out to be fake. On a handbook, I believe it was. It has then cropped back up, and it's in proposed legislation, and we don't necessarily discuss proposed legislation because it's proposed legislation. So I can't really tell you. If we need to adjust a definition later in life, great. I'm all for it.
It would seem to me that in the universe of all possible explanations, that's important. But what you said earlier about it not being diagnostic doesn't help much, because something that is not extraterrestrial, that is, it's of Earth origin, but it's non-human, it's Atlantean or some other dimensional issue that happens to be within this planet. if you don't have signatures for either one of those, it doesn't help you. You're simply still saying,
Right.
we can't explain it with known
Right.
terrestrial and human technology.
Right.
Unless some dolphins get really creative and you're able
Correct.
to nail that down. Right?
Lasers with dolphins on their, or dolphins with lasers on their head.
Well, we know who did that. And Dr. Evil is not a source of yours, right?
It's actually my call sign.
You, soon as a private citizen, not running this office, presumably eventually not with a security clearance, someday you're sitting back and you're watching what I think you hope will be the continued work of this office. You've set this on a train to go forward. What kind of public disclosures do you want to see? Do you want to see annual reports, as the current legislation, I think, calls for? Or would you want your successors to be out doing public events like this, explaining it along the way and not just relying on reports that come out?
No, this has been part of our strategic planning, and I'm looking at my public affairs person because she's been instrumental in helping us do this. I wanted to do this, she wanted to do this from the very beginning. It takes time to build the public affairs plan. Who are you going to engage with? How are you going to engage? And get the community comfortable with that, because my intelligence community, you don't talk to the public. In fact, that was one of the first things I told Sue when she said, "Hey, you're going to have to go out and do a media engagement." I said, I just spent the last 25 years of my life being told that if I ever ended up on TV, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong, and that's bad. And now you want me to go out and willingly subject myself to that. There's that has to be that had to get overcome. She had to hold my hand a lot and make that happen. And then the department, has to get comfortable with spending some of that time to do that transparency, that reach out to make sure that the education continues. And that's one of the key things we're trying to build into certainly the website, right? We've got educational and resources tabs there. I put out all of the open source tracking for everything that we know is tracked, right? Whether it's satellites or aircraft or balloons or whatnot. And those are only the balloons that have transponders on them, because not everybody wants to do that, and then things go crazy. But try to start putting more of that out and have more engagements where you can talk through, this is how this process works, this is why this particular thing we said was a balloon or a bird or not a bird, right? That's one of my favorite ones, I just have to say. You all will learn this as I get this out more and more, right? As we get some of our modeling and sim, we've got some modeling and sim that's outstanding from the sensors to recreate some of the engagements so that you can see what they actually are. Planes and birds in infrared sensors, if they're not exactly in focus, look like spheres and tic tacs because they're out of focus, and that's what they do. And then as you get closer and you refocus them, they come back in, and so you get some of that. Not everything, but you get some of that. But and how do you learn what that is? You got to dig into the bit layer. You got to do things that some of my physicist colleagues are going to love, right? You got to actually get down in there and figure out what the auto gain sensor level is, and so you can figure out if it did it defocus or focus at the time. I mean, all of that takes time. It's not instant. I can't do that overnight.
Well, I think Shane would agree with me when I say that there are many aspects of the intelligence community's work and national security work in general that are very sensitive, and we never hear someone talking publicly about them. So we appreciate the fact that you were willing to come and talk publicly and answer some of these questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.